This is definitely a modern tasting, what we'd call a modern tasting. So as Tom was mentioning before, this tasting sold out really, really fast for a very good reason. It was meant to be much, much bigger, but because of the COVID 4-meter rule restrictions, we had to really cut who could come. So as a result, we've actually got some people joining us online, just one person joining us online. So hello, Peter. How are you, mate? So tonight, hey, mate. So tonight, Alistair is going to be walking us through all these wines, obviously. That was what the whole premise of this whole show is. Alistair was actually meant to be here right now. We had some flights booked for him, but which we obviously had to cancel because you guys, I don't know what you're doing over there, mate. But but just to let everyone know, so the slight logistical challenge with this is that if anyone asks a question, I need to repeat it into this. So he won't be able to hear you. He'll probably be able to hear you laugh at him, which is great, but he won't be able to hear you. He won't be able to hear your direct questions. So please excuse me. I'll have to repeat all of the questions. Danny's just asked for his own microphone, so that's a big no. Definitely not.
No.
So we will get kicked off. The first glass you've got in there, just a bit of a something to refresh the palate, something to bring you in from the road and get you into the feel of tasting is a glass of Franciacorta. So we're staying with the Italian theme, and we are tasting a wine that Italy considers its version of champagne. Unfortunately, there's no Nebbiolo in this, but there is some Pinot Noir. They make it in the method Champenoise, same as they do in Champagne. So just a very interesting, quite hard to find version of sparkling wine from Italy. I thought we'd just stick with an Italian theme this evening rather than anything else. But we are going to get started on the first. Oh, I should also say hello to Luke, who will be running the screens behind the scenes here. How are you, mate?
Evening, everybody.
There he is, the voice from beyond. So if you see the screens just randomly change and things go to like a Google map or something, don't be afraid. I'm controlling it with my mind. So we'll get started on our first bracket. But I mean, the first thing is, pretty much all of you, I would imagine, have had a Nebbiolo before. Yes? No? Hands up, yes? Yep, almost everyone. Okay, cool, good. So you know what the grape variety is. We're going to really do a deep dive into this very interesting grape variety. It's a grape variety that 10 years ago, if I would have asked that question, the number of hands up would have been next to nobody. It's really come a long way in the last kind of 10 years, especially the last 5 years. And we've really kind of gotten behind it here at United Cellars. I personally love it, and I know Alistair loves it as well. He and I both had the great pleasure of being in Piedmont and kind of bringing some of these wines in from Piedmont ourselves. So we're very fortunate to do that, and definitely not doing that for a while. But we're going to get started pouring the first bracket. So Jane, if you wouldn't mind giving me a hand, we're going to do on the left. We're going to have the, I think we've got that. That's Trebbiano, beautiful. Trebbiano to the left glass, and I'll do the Eschetti Langhe Nebbiolo on the right. So Ali, probably just hand over to you for a bit while we're doing the pouring. Excuse me if you can hear the pouring through the microphone. But just like a few words on Nebbiolo for you, mate.
Sure. So yeah, good morning, good evening, everyone. Isn't it amazing what we can do in this day and age? I'm first of all, I'm so sorry I can't be there. You can't understand how sorry I am that I couldn't be there. But I'm here from the comfort of the office to speak with you. And first of all, as Mark's probably said, it'd be great. You're all probably, for being here, keen Nebbiolo enthusiasts. Therefore, it's great to have as much feedback and interaction I haven't got the wines with me. It's very early in the morning. And so I really want to hear your tasting notes. I have tasted most of these wines before, not that some of the local ones that Mark's going to sort of take charge on. But, let's have as much as we can an open discussion. But just my brief thoughts on Nebbiolo. I think, it took me a long time to really fully understand Nebbiolo, and I think it's still, and this is why it's such a fascinating grape, because I know that I'm still learning about Nebbiolo and still tasting different things. It's a thrilling grape. It's a complex grape. It's not an easy beginner's grape to understand. And I remember when I first tried it, getting off in the wine world, I really couldn't understand this grape variety that was high in tannin and high in acidity and high in alcohol, yet low in color, and had these fearsome tannins. I think I was thrown in at the deep end by going to a tasting of Barolo. And I liken it much to sherry in many ways. Sherry is possibly my favorite drink in the world, but when you first try it, it's not the easiest thing to understand. So it took me a while to fully understand it, but when you do get into Nebbiolo, it's extremely addictive, like Pinot Noir. It has an amazing perfume and the way it develops over time. And I think that's the hallmark of many great wines, how they can develop over time. And they develop incredible intricacies and differences. And hopefully we'll see some of those in the wines that we're looking at. I think it wouldn't be unfair, or it would probably be true to say it's Italy's greatest grape variety. I know that the Tuscans would have something to say about that with Sangiovese, but I think it probably is. But the interesting thing is there's only 5,500 hectares of Nebbiolo planted versus 55,000 hectares of Sangiovese. And that's because Nebbiolo is a very fussy grape variety. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it needs all sorts of particular conditions to go well, whereas Sangiovese can do well in other places. And just to look at that, I think I've got some stats here written somewhere. So there's the 55,000 hectares of Sangiovese planted in Italy, 30,000 of Montepulciano, 17,000 of Primitivo, 17,000 of Barbera, and only 5,500 of Nebbiolo. But still, I think it's probably fair to say it's Italy's greatest grape variety. So I think you've got all the wines poured there.
Yeah, so everything's poured. I'll just give you a quick rundown of what you've got in your glasses. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the region itself. So those are the bottles on your screen you've got in front of you. In your left glass, you have the Tyrrell Langhe Nebbiolo. And then in your right glass, one of my favorite ones, the Ascheri Langhe Nebbiolo. So both of them are from the Langhe region in Piemonte. So these are kind of a great, what we call, especially the Ascheri, I call this the gateway drug. It's like, so Nebbiolo, like Pinot Noir, as Ali was just indicating, it's got, once it kind of gets under your skin, like Pinot Noir, you really do get quite obsessed with it. And that's why I call this the gateway drug. These wines are very much on the more approachable side of things. As we go up in quality and we go kind of smaller and smaller into the crus, you'll see that the intensity of flavor, the alcohol goes up, the tannins go up, the acidity goes up. It becomes kind of this crescendo of flavor. But here is where we kind of start the story. We started with the kind of a lot more approachable, a lot more easy to drink, lighter, less aggressive tannin, but you can still taste it. So an image we've got here, which is just of Piedmont, in just to start us off. And then we're just going to go, take a little trip into where each of these wines comes from. So Ali, the Langhe is kind of, it kind of surrounds the areas of Barbaresco and Barolo. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's pretty much right. And I think what you've said, Mark, is really, really well put. I love the sort of gateway analogy you've got there. That's exactly what this wine is. And I remember when we first tasted this wine, this is the Ascheri, which is one that we bring in. It just ticks all the boxes. This I talked about earlier on, how it took me a long time to understand Nebbiolo, because I was thrown in at the deep end with these tannic, muscular Barolos. This here, the Langhi Neb, especially the Ascari, is one that, I know we've got the other one on the map, but is a wine that is much easier to understand. It's softer. Langhi Nebbiolo, we'll talk about Barolo and Barbaresco later, was invented as a way for producers to declassify their Barolo or their Barbaresco and have either wines from younger vines, wines that they didn't think would representative of their Barolo, or wines that they wanted to release earlier. They don't need to be aged as long, so they're fruitier, they're easier to understand, they're not quite as tannic and muscular. So I think that this is a great way to start with these two wines. So Mark, the Trediberi, can you tell me a little bit about that one?
Sure, of course. So the Trediberi, I mean, I said that it's not exactly an overtly tannic wine, but there's still plenty of tannin in that. You really get that kind of aggressive. They're quite. I always find with Nebbiolo, they're quite hard, almost chalk tannins. They're really quite tough, and a lot of people say they're kind of like muscular, heavy, dense tannins. So if you think this is a good introduction, because it's kind of like there's definitely tannin there, but just wait till you get to the big guys, because this will get you used to it, you know. So the Trediberi is they're a large cooperative, and they do produce some cru wines, some top end Barolo wines, but by and large, these guys, their absolute speciality is making larger volumes of more attractively priced entry level wines, like this one. This wine here is absolutely their biggest seller. It's huge, quite huge volumes for Piedmont, I should say. Huge volumes. It's nothing to a lot of other places, but yeah. So it's definitely an approachable entry level style. We'll move on to the Ascari, which Ali and I actually have quite a funny story about. I mean, we had I met Ali in London on a buying trip. This was in January of last year, and we were on the hunt for some Nebbiolo. And we'd been tasting at a big tasting room all day. This is the Ascari, this is the barrel room right here. And we'd been tasting all day, and it had been a really annoying, fruitless day. And then we met this man. This is Matteo, who he's about my height. He's about 6'5", but he outweighs me by quite a lot. He's a monster of a man. Looks like he plays rugby.
Don Corleone, isn't he?
Yeah, Don Corleone. He does. He looks like the Don. Yeah. So, and we met him. He was standing at this, and we'd been walking around for hours trying to find something. And we had just no wins at all. And then we met the Don, and then everything fell into place. He invited us to his vineyards and to his winery, which is where we went. And he is actually the head of the Consorzio di Barolo, which is basically the governing body of Barolo. Now, what that means is he is in charge of a lot of changing any of the rules within Barolo. So he's a very powerful man, and you know, if you get on his wrong side, you'll get whacked. So he
might sit on you, which would be dangerous. But he's a lovely guy, isn't he? I'm going to ask you in a minute. I'd love to hear some feedback from everyone about the two wines. But I just realised we haven't really talked about the geography of Piemonte, Anthony. So just briefly to sort of put it into so you understand. So Nebbiolo, the name, a little bit of background on Nebbiolo. The name comes from nebbia, fog in Italian. And that's because when they harvest these grapes, it's done in October, and there's a lot of fog in the hills, in the Langhi Hills. So it's a fussy grape, as I mentioned earlier on Nebbiolo. It's one of the first to ripen, which means it's prone to frost in the vineyard. And it's one of the last to ripen. So one of the first to burst, and then one of the last to ripen. So it has a very long growing season. So prone to frost at the beginning, and then obviously, if it's being harvested in October, it's prone to those rains and that they sometimes get at harvest time. So it needs to be planted in the right areas. And you see here, that's a great picture there. You can see that on three sides, Piemonte, which means foot of the mountains, is surrounded by the Alps, essentially, which creates these very harsh, severe winters, which is great for vines, actually. I think one of the main reasons it does so well, I'm a big fan of vine dormancy. In the winter, if vines can really go to sleep and shut down, it gives them longevity, which obviously you don't get in a lot of warmer places. So I think that's very important for vineyards. And then they have pretty warm summers. And this needs to be, Nebbiolo is tricky. It needs to be on the right soils, which is normally calcareous marl or limestone based soils. If it's on the wrong soils, it puts all its energy into producing shoots and leaves and not on fruit. It needs to be southern or southeastern exposure, or it won't ripen properly. So there's a whole host of things. It's got a thin skin, so it's prone to rot in the vineyard. So that's why it's a particularly tricky grape, and it's not just an easy grape like Cabernet or Sangiovese or Malbec that you can plant, or Tempranillo, and it does well in lots of places. It can mutate very easily in the vineyard as well, which means it can be very tricky. So it's not the easiest grape variety, and that's why it really does its best here. So just a little bit of background on that, but I'd love to hear I think I know what you guys are going to say about this, but I'd love to hear what you think of the difference between these first two entry level wines that we're looking at, entry to Piemonte.
What do we think?
Any comments?
Any comments? Yeah. Any thoughts on first question? Do you like? Is it the style of wine that you would like? I get a lovely, as with a lot of Italian wines, I get a lovely savoury character. That's what I find is kind of at the core of a lot of Italian wines, is a savouriness, like a kind of bay leaf, oregano element to them. Australian wines and New Zealand wines tend to be very fruit based. It's kind of the core of all these wines is about fruit, but that's not about Italian wines. Italian wines, you're never really searching. You're never really finding an abundance of fruit character in it. In this, they're quite floral wines. They're quite pretty, but always very savoury. So, any preference on the styles?
Do a hands up for wine one with Tyrrell.
They are quite young, aren't they? Yeah.
And hands up for wine two, the Ascari. Okay.
Wine two.
Yeah.
It looks like wine two winner then, is it? I think I was sort of hoping that you'd say that in a way, because this is a wine that obviously we brought in, and we're massive fans of this, and we really did think this would be the wine that is perfect for as an entry level, but also for the Australian market as well. It's really accessible, but it just hints at what Nebbiolo can be. I think I may have heard someone say there that the 19 is very young. It is very young, so it still will probably have, I imagine, pretty fearsome tannins. But the 17 should be drinking really nicely now. Peter, what are your thoughts? I can see that you are keen on two.
Sorry, I'm just trying to munch away my mortadella.
Well, you carry on. Don't you worry about that. Sounds rather good.
So he's very keen on Nebbiolo. He bought every one of these wines for the tasting. So Pete's going to have a very busy night tonight.
I had to make a decision about whether I was going to open all 8, and in the end, I've only opened one from each of the 4 sessions. So
it's okay. That's very restrained of you, Pete. 4 wines.
And I chose the Ascari, and I love it.
Very good. Very good.
That's nice to hear. But have you not got a Coravin, Peter, that you can sort of dip into some of these with?
Yeah, I just was not prepared today. It's terrible.
No problem. So we've got. It sounds like
a bit of feedback here. So so a gentleman saying that the Treddy Berry is definitely more like floral. You're saying like it's got that youthfulness to it and quite clean. That absolutely is Treddy Berry. Just from a I know this producer very, very well. They tend to use a lot of stainless steel rather than old oak of any kind. So they really are all about preserving that freshness and brightness and lightness, which is quite rare with Nebbiolo producers. Whereas the Ascari is, I think this is no longer current vintage, but it's not far off current vintage. So Matteo definitely does prefer even his entry level wines. to have a little bit of age on them before release, so that you can get a little bit more of that. I mean, I would say the Eschetti is a little bit more complex. The Tyrrell is a little bit more straightforward, and yeah, it is a bit prettier and lighter. But I think the Eschetti is just a little bit more complex, kind of stays in your mouth a bit longer. So,
Mark, would you say then that I mean, I know, and I'm going to say something about this in a minute, because I think you can't really talk about Nebbiolo or Barolo without talking about the traditionists and the modernists, which is quite an important thing. Would you say that with this that the Trediberi is more modern, more in the modernist camp, which we can
definitely explain. And we'll go. I think we'll go into that a little bit more when we talk about the especially the Barbaresco when we get into that. But I'd say there's kind of like a more modernity involved in that Trediberi, whereas the Eschetti, and you saw an image of Dr. Matteo with an enormous barrel. Like I said, he's 6'5", and that barrel is considerably taller than him. Those barrels are quite enormous. And they utilize a lot of those big old barrels of botti, and lots of old oak, which is a very traditional way of making growler. So we've got quite a few empty glasses here, Ali. So Jane and I are going to pour the next bracket, which is Nebbiolo from another home. So if you could just give us a bit of a run through on, I mean, I'm more than happy to talk about these local examples, because I'm not sure you've actually tried many of these wines, because a lot of the time they don't make it out of Australia that often. But yeah, any comments on that?
Yeah, no, I haven't tried either of these wines, and I'm actually, this is going to be fascinating for me to hear this. Although, interestingly enough, I did, when I was it's not quite related, but when I was in France, I was in the Rhône Valley recently. I could tell you all about that a bit later. I was in actually the hotel we stayed at, Mark, in Tain-l'Hermitage, and I was looking through the wine list, and we've been tasting big Rhônes all day, and it was a massive delight to come across the Jasper Hill Georges Paddock Riesling from 2017 that they had on their list there. So I did enjoy that wine. No, I haven't tried either of these wines. But I did try recently Steve Pennell's Nebbiolo, which I was very, very impressed with. But as I said earlier on, just so local interpretations or Nebbiolo outside of Italy, and for all the reasons that I've just said as to why it's not planted so widely, it is because it is a very, very difficult grape variety to get right. But people that get bitten by the Nebbiolo bug have gone over the world and have tried to replicate it. And I think actually it's probably fair to say that I think out of all the examples, I've tried some from Washington State in America, they weren't particularly good. I used to work at an estate in Chile and we had some Nebbiolo. It wasn't particularly good. I've had some South African Nebbiolo, which was not bad. I think
not great, but not bad.
No, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. And I think I think Australia is the second best place that I've tasted the Nebbiolo that I've tasted, having tasted Steve's and some, I think Tommy Shodbrook's quite a lot from Adelaide Hills. And I know that Adelaide Hills is perhaps one of the, dare I say it, most similar climates to Piemonte, and I say that.
All things considered, potentially, yeah. But I mean, so from a personal perspective, I did vintage in Oregon in 2018, and had the great pleasure of trying a Nebbiolo from there and a Nebbiolo from Washington State, a little bit further north in the USA. And they were actually quite fantastic versions of Nebbiolo. And like Ali just said, it's about finding those kind of similar, especially the Washington State one, where it gets intensely hot summers but very cold winters. It's quite mountainous and hilly. The soils aren't similar, but the kind of region, the climatic conditions are similar enough that it was actually
continental climate. Yeah, they have very, very, very hot summers there, don't they? And pretty cool winters. Yeah.
So, Ali, if you don't mind, mate, I'll just do a quick run through, and Luke, if you wouldn't mind just showing us a bit of the imagery of where we're taking these wines from. So the wine in your left glass is made by a producer. It's made in Piedmont. It's travelled a long way, yeah. Just a little bit of a distance away. So the first one we're trying is from Primo Estate, so a very, very well-known producer in the McLaren Vale. Strong Italian heritage, strong Italian roots. Primo Estate makes some modern Australian wines, but they also make a lot of Italian varietals. They specialise in Italian varietals. Pinot Grigio, Sangiovese, and of course Nebbiolo. Now, and they make this Nebbiolo specifically, especially for us. And we're very happy they do. So the McLaren Vale, like people think of the McLaren Vale, and I myself, by and large, think of the McLaren Vale as a hot, dry place, right? You're in South Australia. I mean, look at it. It's dry. It's red. This thick red place, very brown, drought-ridden. But the honest truth is, Italian varietals, they actually grow really, really well in this area. You would have heard of several producers, like Coriol is one. They grow Tempranillo, Sangiovese, they grow Fiano, Vermentino. Oliver's Turanga, they grow Vermentino, Fiano, they've just grown Mencia from Spain. So they grow very Mediterranean climates, and that is very significantly. Luke, if you could just pull the screen out slightly, please, that you'll be able to see the ocean. Where are we? North. If you can just go, yeah, there it is. You can see the proximity to the ocean. And so if you go, you think about, you're thinking around up here, like around Gamarika, like Lenswood, Balhana, that's Adelaide Hills. Then you go further north, Tanunda, Lindok, Seppeltsfield, that's Barossa Valley, right? And then you go further north and you're getting into the Clare Valley. None of them are anywhere near the water. But you come down to McLaren Vale and you really honestly are, like Maslin Beach, which is a nudist beach, by the way. I found that out the hard way. Yeah, that's a true story. You are right. You're right on the water. So you do actually get a lot of amazing breezes off the ocean, especially in the afternoon. And Luke, if you wouldn't mind going back into the Angel Gully vineyard again, the Angel Gully Rise. This is a specific vineyard that the Primo family, they own the vineyard, and they plant Nebbiolo and a couple of other. They grow some Barbera and Dolcetto there, so grape varieties from Piedmont. You'll see here it's quite high elevation, and it is very, very hilly. So you get the ocean breezes off the ocean, and you get this kind of mountainous effect with the hillsides. So whilst you think of South Australia as being hot and dry, I mean, this is really quite green, and it does get quite a lot of rainfall here. So it's actually quite perfect. And you see it's quite well shaded from the sun. It doesn't get too hot in the summer. It gets a lovely breeze in the evenings. So it actually grows Nebbiolo really quite well. Now, obviously, when you taste this wine, it's got a lot more body and character. I get a lot more fruit out of this wine as well compared to the Italian grape varietals. There's Joe going through his vineyards. And the alcohol percentage, it jumps up quite a bit, but that's Australian wine in general, usually, compared to European wines. But there's still, I still get a lot of that kind of earthy, almost rusty nail, savoury bay leaf characters in it. It's
Mark, what sort of altitude are these guys at here? Because looking at this, it looks like they've got a little bit of altitude here, which would help temper the.
From memory, it's about 180 meters, so it's not actually.
Oh, it's not that high.
It's not crazy high, but for McLaren, I mean, McLaren Flat is 20 meters. Like it's nothing. So compared to that, and you do have these kind of flat lands that allow the ocean breeze to come in and kind of fill into these little gullies, which is why it's called the Angel Gully. It's literally creates these little gullies in there. So yeah, it is. It definitely has a perfume. I get a little bit of like a eucalypt menthol character on it as well.
How's that one going down? I'm seeing some nods around the table, which looks like a good sign.
So we've got a comment here. Yeah, definitely. There's a similarity, yeah. Yep. That is a very, very good point, and Joe definitely does that, and especially, I mean, he makes Amarone style wines as well, which typically have that little bit, that higher alcohol, but a little bit of sugar to balance it. And I mean, I think this wine is pretty dry.
Sorry, Mark, just for the benefit of everyone tuning in virtually, could you just repeat the question for us?
Sorry about that. It was mainly just a comment about, this gentleman's pointed out that the Angel Gully Rise is known for its Shiraz, and he does a single vineyard Shiraz from there, Joe Grilly. And the gentleman was saying that there is a similarity between the flavours of that Angel Gully Rise Shiraz and this Nebbiolo, which I think is very interesting.
No, that's interesting. They're kind of a house. There's a noted house style there that Joe, the winemakers, that you can see through the two wines.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, funnily enough, so they don't actually make this wine. The Primo boys, they don't actually make this wine themselves. This is just made for us, and they make such time and it's only on their like. Are you in their club? That would be why. Yeah, that would be why. So it's not commercially available. Yeah. So we're very lucky to get a hold of it because I love it. I love this wine. And when Matteo, Joe's son, kind of sent us the samples, he's like, "Oh, what do you think about Nebbiolo?" And I was just like, "Please." So yeah. So this is
20. It's just under $30.
yeah.
Oh, the double.
Yeah.
Double.
Significantly more. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. So that's a really good segue there. So we're going to move on to the Primo. So just for Ali's view there. So the gentleman said, how much is the cost of the Primo one? And it's $30 around about. And the Jasper is quite a bit more. So that's why it's
it's considerably more, isn't it? And I think actually it's listening to everyone there and for everything that I said at the beginning about Nebbiolo's fussy, Nebbiolo's this, and to produce this expression, I think it's always important to say that, you don't have to always expect, a wine can be delicious and doesn't have to tick all those hallmarks of Nebbiolo, so to speak. So it's, hearing that one, the similarities to Shiraz and a richer style. I guess it's complex because some people, when you see Nebbiolo, you might expect to get that Italian interpretation, but there's no reason why actually it can't just be a delicious wine. But I think we might see now with this next one that it's perhaps, do you think, Mark, more similar to, dare I say, a Piemonte style?
So the gentleman's just made the comment, so that's a good point, and it's the kind of wine where you're like, especially at that price point, where you're kind of just like, do I enjoy it? Would I drink a bottle of that? Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
And I wouldn't necessarily put it in the cellar for 15 years, like you would a Barolo or like you would this next one we're about to taste. But the price point is kind of indicative of that. It kind of gives you the figures.
Would you think that the Jasper Hill is now more similar to the classic Nebbiolo?
So let's all talk through that together. So I'll run through just the basics of the geography here. So what we're looking at here is Heathcote, and this is, Jasper Hill are one of my personal absolute favorite wineries. They're absolutely amazing. They've been organic since long before it was cool. Long before it was a buzzword, and they've never put it on their labels because the winemaker there says that it's just what should be done. It's not what is cool or what you should do to sell more wine. It's just what has to be done to make sure you've got good vineyards. So, and everything in this vineyard, in this Nebbiolo vineyard, hand tended, hand picked, very, very lovingly cared for, and this wine. So we're talking about a really dry area. Now this, I think, it's especially grey in this image here. Might be dusk or something, but we're not talking about hillsides here as we were in the Angel Gully Rise there, but here we're talking about elevation. Anyone who's been to Heathcote, it is very, very inland, but it is quite elevated. This vineyard around here, it's around about 700 meters above sea level. So you get this really distinctive diurnal shift, which means a significant difference between the daily maximum and the overnight minimum. Anyone who's been to the snow will realize, even if it's a beautiful sunny day during the day, as soon as the sun sets, because you're up high, the temperature just plummets, absolutely plummets. And that's what Heath is absolutely known for. It gets really, don't get me wrong, it gets really warm during the day, especially in the middle of the harvest season in summer. It can get really warm, but it's never the muggy heat of like the Hunter Valley or Sydney where we are now. It's always a dry heat.
I remember actually, Mark, going into that vineyard back in 2012, and we were up there it was beginning of November. It was the second week of November, I think, and we went up there and had a bacon sandwich in that vineyard and a glass of Riesling or something, and it was bloody cold.
Yeah,
it was, first thing in the morning. We were up there really early. It really was chilly and foggy, and we were all dressed up, and then 3 hours later it was gorgeous and warm. I was amazed at quite how chilly it was, and that's that diurnal sort of variation that you're mentioning there. Really is very, very marked.
Yeah. So, I mean, this, as I said, elevation's everything here. This is where Nebbiolo in Australia is allowed to really gain a lot more complexity. And as Ali mentioned before at the very start, it's the first to burst. This Nebbiolo in Piedmont, it's the first to burst. That means it's the first berry to flower, but it is the last one that you harvest, which is incredibly frustrating because it's the longest period of time where something can go very wrong and you don't get a harvest. So it's a pain, and if it didn't taste so good, then they'd probably rip it up a long time ago. So, but this one here in Heathcote is where, as I said, it's a very dry heat. They don't have that same issue as they have in the Hunter and in other really warm regions where mold or fungus or rainfalls can cause some serious problems. And as Ali said before, Nebbiolo has a very thin skin, so any rot or fungus just rips through the vineyard and just destroys your entire crop. So they don't have that. It's a dry heat, and overnight it's quite cold, and it allows this grape variety to really gain complexity over weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on the vine. So
I remember once someone explained, they were asked to explain in a few words, what is Nebbiolo, and they said it's Pinot Noir with a bad attitude, and that's saying something.
Really. Pinot Noir can be a bit of a pain too. So we've got a question.
Pain. So imagine that with bad attitude. That's Nebbiolo for you. How's everyone? How are these going down?
We just got a question here, Ali.
Is there an Australian Nebbiolo that's been iconic?
That's a very good question. So the gentleman's asked, is there an Australian Nebbiolo that could be classified as iconic? Now, we're going to get into something later on that'll it's not iconic. It's definitely not iconic, but it's more in the style of what I'm about to talk about. But I would say this would be one of the most iconic Nebbiolos in terms of attempting to imitate where it originally came from. This, to me, it has got those same chalky tannins. It's got a lot of that floral complexity. It's got high acidity, really high acidity. It's got warm alcohol, but that's consistent with Barolo. But this, for me, I would say this or so Henschke do another one from the Eden Valley, right? Very, very. It's called the High Eden, the highest section of the Eden Valley, which is already very high. And they make one called the Rose Grower, which is one of the closest New World examples I've ever tried to. So those are what I would call iconic. But on the other side, there are producers like Luke Lambert in the Yarra Valley. If anyone's ever tried Luke Lambert's Nebbiolo, that's iconic. And that's iconic for a very different reason. I mean, that wine, that sells out so fast because it is just such a good wine. It is enjoyable, it's approachable. It's more like the Primo than it is. It's just such a beautiful, drinkable wine. It's got complexity, it's got ageability, but he just has really mastered the art of grape variety in the Yarra Valley.
I agree with that one. I've had that several times, and I just think it's an absolutely delicious expression of Nebbiolo. I'll tell you the other one that I had, and I don't know if he still makes it, Mark, you'll probably know, is Tommy Shobrook. Does he still make, he had one called Novello, and then he had a DD one or something like that. He made one in a rosé style and more in a proper Nebbiolo style, because he worked obviously for quite a few years over in Piemonte.
I'm almost
Is he still
positive
there?
he's pulled it up. Unfortunately, I'm almost positive it's gone.
Okay.
Yeah,
that was a
that's
shame.
another really good point. So Gioconda has one, and surprise,
Yeah.
surprise, look at where we are. So yeah, Beechworth, Heathcote. So similar. Beechworth has a very similar climate, high altitude, freezing cold nights. If you've ever been there, like, same thing. I was there in it would have been November, and it was kind of 28 degrees during the middle of the day, and then it gets down to about 6 degrees overnight. It's freezing. Definitely, most of it. This is infanticide. What we have done here. This is way too young. But I can already taste. Oh, it's gorgeous, absolutely. And this has been open for a while as well. We did pop the tops on these a while ago. So this will definitely gain a lot more complexity, a lot more of that florality. I can kind of just see it starting to come through. That pretty blue fruited, like it's almost like a violet jasmine character that I think will really start to come out.
Mark, what we talked a little bit about, well, and we're going to talk a bit more in a minute about the aging and whether they're using oak, old oak, new oak. What are they using here? Do you know if are they using sort of old oak, I would imagine, or
they use pretty much exclusively old oak. They
Okay.
don't use any new oak at all. Same with the Primo guys. There's no new oak. I mean, these wines, they don't need any more tannin. Let's put it that way. They're definitely tannic enough, and you don't need any wood tannins in there. But yeah, no, they use old French oak. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a few more empty glasses. So this is kind of an unfair question, but preferences between the two. So the Primo, any hands up there? Yeah. Yeah. And then Jasper, a few more. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Different reasons, exactly. Yeah.
And I'm guessing I'm going to ask Peter's got another mouthful of mortadella, but I'm wondering, Pete, did you open the? I imagine you opened the Jasper Hill here, did you?
I opened the Jasper Hill because I figured that the United Cellars people would pick a really excellent wine to have their brand on. So there was no.
Good job, Pete. Checks in the mail, mate.
And look, for 2019, it's already sort of showing something. And I opened mine quite early, and it has shown a bit of difference with a bit of opening. Mark, I was curious as to the soil types for the Primo and the Jasper Hill. How do they compare to the Nebbiolo Piemonte soil types?
Great question, Pete. So I'll start with Jasper Hill. So Jasper Hill have a very, very unique soil type up where they are. It's called Cambrian soil, and it's like a it's like a blue. It's almost slaty. So it's very, very incredibly old. So it's called Cambrian because it's from the Precambrian era. So it's the soil is I think it's 10 million years old. It is remarkably ancient soil. So it's incredibly poor soil. A lot of the nutrients really have been used up millennia ago. And it's now, that's part of the reason why I think Nebbiolo goes quite well. It's kind of, you're forcing it to struggle to survive, which is usually where you get the best wines. But yeah, I think it's about 10 million years old. Don't quote me on the exact date, but and the McLaren Vale is so it's brownstone, and it's got the section where they own Angel Gully. It's actually got some a base of limestone, which I think is about 1 meter or 2 meters under the very center of the soil. The top is this kind of brown clay, which you would have seen when we did the flyover. You can see this kind of brown clay. Yeah.
A heavy soil. If I'm on the Jasper Hill, when we looked at that, it looked almost slightly ready, or is it more of a slaty? Can we go back to that picture of the soil? I don't know if
Of
Luke
course.
can do that.
Yeah,
Just
no
out
problem.
of interest, it's very difficult to tell soil type by looking at it, but I don't know if that's easy to do.
Here we go. We're
Oh,
taking
wow.
it across the world.
Isn't this amazing? I'm being transported to
You can see.
there. Now that looks almost like a ready kind of, what is it, Marley type? It's difficult. It's very difficult to see, isn't it?
Yeah. All I know, I know specifically that area where they are. It's called Cambrian soil.
Cambrian.
Cambrian.
Yeah.
Dates back to the Precambrian era. Obviously, a long time before any of us were here. And so that will lead us on to our next bracket. So we're going to move on to the big fight of the night, Barbaresco versus Barolo. So Ali, I'll leave this to you to potentially say a few words about kind of the back and forth between Barolo and Barbaresco, because this, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, this is where a lot of confusion can occur between Barolo and Barbaresco.
Yeah, I think first of all, I've realised we've got to sort of bracket three without not that anyone needs to be told, because you can all smell your own things, but the classic descriptors of Nebbiolo, that when people talk about flavours and smells, is this sort of tar and roses, and I think you may have found that a little bit in the Jasper Hill, the sort of slightly floral character that you get. It's less. It's not so much about a deep fruit expression, more about an earthiness, a truffly character, which you think you might be able to pick up in these. So earthy tobacco, truffle, violets, tar, roses, all sort of extremely complex aromas that come through with Nebbiolo. And as it ages, and again, actually, we've got some older wines here, but these will still be pretty big wines. And I imagine, I know Mark's very good at this and the team are very good, that these have been decanted and have had quite a bit of air get to them to help soften those tannins, which is really important. Peter's been doing that, I can see, with his which is really, really important. And people often, I get asked a lot about the importance of decanting, and I think it can be absolutely vital for a lot of these wines. And these are wines that demand air. These are wines that will go for years and years and years. And really, active decanting can help soften those often fierce tannins. But I digress, because we're talking now about Barolo versus Barbaresco. So Barolo is often described as the king, and Barbaresco, possibly the queen. And I don't think we're allowed nowadays to talk about masculine versus feminine wines and styles. I think that's not allowed to, but I'm going to sort of put it in those terms because historically that's how it's been told. So Barolo has always been described as masculine, and Barbaresco as feminine. And I'm, I hope that doesn't offend anyone. But that is kind of in a short. So Barolo, both of these great areas are by the Tanaro, which is your favorite. We haven't tried it yet. By the south of the Tanaro River, which is a really important part of making up Barolo and Barbaresco. So Barolo is the largest. There's 1,800 hectares planted versus I think it's 700, 750. So it's more than double the size Barolo is of Barbaresco. But Barolo is made up of alluvial marine soils, and there's two main valleys in Barolo, and they are the Valley of Barolo and the Valley of Serralunga. And within those you have 11 communes. And here the soils within, it's also actually quite important to look at Barolo. First of all, you've got the two valleys. So you've got the Barolo Valley and the Serralunga. Barolo has lighter calcareous soils, and the Serralunga Valley has heavier soils with more lime and limestone and iron. And that means that the Serralunga, the wine that we're having, the Barolo Serrano, comes from the Serralunga Valley. And here you tend to find with those those richer, heavier soils, you have an even more tannic and richer expression of Barolo. So even within Barolo, you've got the two valleys, one slightly more elegant, and this is the richer, denser style that we've got here. So here you might find a leathery, truffly kind of character. And one of the things that Matteo Ascari does with this Barolo is he uses what they call the submerged cap method, which they use at Henschke as well for a lot of their wines, which is essentially to get very gentle extraction. They hold the cap of the fermenting juice under the cap, just to get very soft, gentle extraction, not to be doing too much pump overs, which is effectively pouring the wine over the cap at the top. I hope this all makes sense. But he's looking to soften those tannins by being as gentle with his extraction as possible. So Barolo, the big masculine style. And one of the big differences is the aging requirements. So Barolo has to spend at least 3 years before it's released. 2 of those have to be in oak. And then 1 year aging in bottle. To be a Reserva Barolo, it has to be 5 years in total. And then we go to Barbaresco. So we're here in Barolo, but we'll to talk about the differences of Barbaresco. So Barbaresco, south of the river as well, but closer to the river of Tanaro. So what does that mean? That means it's warmer. Which means it ripens earlier, which means they tend to have better vintages, better run of vintages, because of what we talked about earlier on, it being a late ripening variety. In Barbaresco, they tend to ripen a little bit earlier, and therefore you get a slightly fruitier style, dare I say it, perhaps more elegant, often a little bit lower in alcohol, but that's changing a lot now. So an earlier maturing, I would say, and I think actually we're talking generalizations here. It's not strictly true, but generally Barbaresco will mature at a quicker rate. And it'd be really interesting to see your feedback on these two as to whether this is the more approachable. So, Perceived Wisdom would say that we've got 2 from the same vintage here, and 2015 was a superb vintage and a powerful vintage. A very small crop, so it'd be interesting to see what your thoughts are.
I strongly encourage you guys to keep going back and forth between these wines. I can see many of you already are, and really give it a good. This is why we've got these big glasses. Really give it a good whirl. So for me, immediately the gorgeous floral character of that Barbaresco just jumps from the glass. It has got this almost like a musk potpourri element to it. It is floral and beautiful, and it is quite a bit softer on the palate as well, not as densely tannic. Tar and Roses is the absolute classic tasting note of Nebbiolo around the world. Really, that's kind of like its calling card, so to speak. But the rose has gone to kind of dried rose petal, and like I said, potpourri I get a lot of.
And how long did you decant these both for the same period of time?
We did everything at the same time. So I think it was about 2 hours ago, 2 and a bit hours ago. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right. And so from what you'd expect, as I said, Perceived Wisdom would be that Barbaresco should be maturing quicker, should be more elegant, should perhaps be slightly more accessible at this young age. Is that bearing true? Would everyone agree with that? Is the Barolo the more powerful of the two, or is that not the case? Any thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the commentary here is the Barbaresco is just a hint smoother. I find the tannins a little bit lighter, a little bit softer, a little bit sandier, whereas the Barolo I find to be that much more kind of dense. I keep coming back to that word chalky tannin, really kind of thick chalk tannins.
And how about Peter? Which one did you open, or have you gone for both here?
I tried to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so I opened up the 13 Barolo.
Aha, see.
So it's not quite a fair comparison of 15 versus 15. They're remarkably different, but I must admit I do like the Barolo better. It's just a personal taste.
From a personal perspective, if you were going to say tar and roses, as I said, the calling card, I'd say Barolo is the tar and Barbaresco is the roses. Like I really get it, like again an ironstone character, like an irony, rusty nail, almost kind of sanguine, bloody character in the Barolo. It's really a dense, rich, earthy wine.
Should we have a little look? So, hands up for Barbaresco.
Not choosing. I refuse. I refuse.
Hands up for Barolo.
And this is where you put the other hand up for the Barolo. Yeah.
Very 50-50, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah, so it's what exactly right. It's what to drink now versus what to have later. So
Yeah,
no,
it's
5 years, it's still way too young, definitely.
and also particularly this vintage, and it's important to say as well, you know, we're all talking about global warming all over the world and that effect that it has on vintages, and it has had a huge effect actually in this region. They haven't had many bad vintages for a while. You know, they tend to keep having good vintage after good vintage, and having just got back from the Rhône Valley as well, same kind of thing there. There hasn't really been a complete shocker for a while, and 2015 was a particularly concentrated vintage. So you are tasting really quite powerful wines, especially that Barolo. That is a dense expression of Barolo.
I mean, I think you guys will have the tannin in your teeth until you wake up tomorrow morning. I mean, this is two questions here. Okay, cool. Price points? Should we?
Barbaresco is sitting at 99. Barolo is sitting at 199.
190 was that? Is it double?
Okay, that's a great question. So basically just drinking window of 2015, Barolo and Barbaresco, Ali, in your opinion. So kind of when, so the first answer is a long time, because that tends to just be the answer for Barolo and Barbaresco in general. There are very few that that's a very, very good, there aren't too many wines from the 70s around anymore from this region, are there? So so kind of drinking window on this, Ali, what would you think?
Oh, that's you know, again, it's all a very personal thing. I would say realistically, these wines probably shouldn't be opened. I would say they'll start developing really interesting things in about 5 years, probably both of them. And I think, you know, there's nothing, as you can see, you're all enjoying them now, and they're fascinating wines, but they'll just begin to shed a bit of that tannin after about 5 years, and continue, I would think, from a vintage like this to drink for another 20 years, I would think, at least. You know, certainly between, you know, up to 2040, they'd be developing lots of interesting things.
A good rule of thumb is definitely 10 years is kind of where you want to think about it.
How big is the push though to develop?
So another question. So that's a fantastic question. So what the question was, what's the push to move towards earlier drinking Barolo? That's probably actually going to take us on to our next bracket really, 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 really well. It's a fantastic segue. I could not have written that better myself. So a lot of that does tend to take us into a topic which has been quite controversial, I would say, in Piedmont, and especially in Barolo and Barbaresco, and that's what you would call the traditionalists versus the modernists. And what I've done here with the fourth bracket is I've gone for the most traditional wine we have and the most modern wine we have. So I've really taken it in two polar opposite directions. It's kind of an unfair way of doing this, because, but you know, you couldn't get more different here. But it's much more subtle than what I'm going to be showing you in this one here. But Ali, would you mind giving us a bit of a rundown in your opinion on what you would classify that kind of this battle to be about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, before we go directly into this battle, which I think I really like what you're doing there, I think it's important we look at the traditionalist versus modernist in Piemonte itself, because that's a big thing. And I wrote down, often when you're doing these tastings, you're asked to write down, what is tradition versus modernist. It's a big thing. And so I found, when I was looking through my notes earlier on, something that I'd written to another tasting I did. So looking at Piemonte, what is tradition versus modernist? So traditionalists see themselves as the guardians of authentic Barolo, the outcome of a long, slow vinification followed by prolonged aging in large oak casks. Modernists, by and large, favour shorter macerations and more overt fruitiness, and often use barriques, so small barrels, to give the wine its structure and additional flavours. I have sympathies with both camps, which are both betrayed by their excesses. So poor traditionalists produce volatile, astringent, and often dried out wines with ferocious tannins. Mediocre modernists swamp the complex aromas and fruit of the wines with toasty, chocolatey new oak flavours. Yet few would dispute that there are brilliant winemakers in both of these opposed schools. So essentially, traditionalists used to have very long macerations, so aging on their skin, so they get a lot of tannin. Then they didn't want any new oak influence, so they'd have old oak botties, and they'd often age them for 15, 16, up to 17 years. And then the traditionalists came along, and realistically, that's not a commercially viable proposition to have a wine that you're not releasing for 20 odd years, and it's too tannic to do so. So the modernists came along in the 80s and sort of said, no, we're going to do very short macerations. We're going to use, small oak barriques, and we're going to get completely different style. And I think the reality now in Barolo and in Piemonte is somewhere in between. So these modernists that are using small oak are now using larger oak. That's coming back into fashion. And now with better viticulture, the traditionalists are doing much shorter macerations as well. So it's sort of it's very difficult now to say what is old, what is new in Piemonte itself. But looking at this particular battle, I think we've got Ascari, Barolo, Serrano. So Ascari, as we've talked about, Matteo, is probably, and I think we asked him this himself, Mark, when we were there, are you a traditionalist and a modernist? And I think he sort of avoided the question, but hinted that he was more of a traditionalist.
I think the head of the Consorzio di Barolo would pretty much have to be a traditionalist. I'm not sure you'd be voted out immediately otherwise. But.
I think it's interesting though. As I said, I think the lines are very blurred now between what is traditionalist and what is modernist, and I think they're coming to a pretty common ground now. But I think it needed to happen where people were pushing the boundaries and doing something a little bit different. And as I said, a commercial proposition of a wine that's being aged for 17 years before you can release it. It's not great, is it?
So that's hopefully that has kind of in part answered the question. There was a move to, and a lot of it was, then please tell me if I'm wrong here, Ali. A lot of it was some younger winemakers who studied in France, and they studied winemaking in France, and they kind of saw what was going on there, saw the popularity of French wines, and was kind of like, we can make wines just as good as you guys. We can be just as popular. We can charge just as much. Our wines are just as good. So we might kind of borrow a few little tricks here and there, especially from Burgundy. And there's a lot of people that say that Nebbiolo is Burgundy of Italy. So that makes a certain amount of sense. And they'd age them in French oak barriques. The macerations were shorter, as they are with Pinot Noir. And it was in an attempt to kind of cut out a lot of that really dense tannin and make it a more kind of approachable wine. Still complex, still beautifully complex, still ageable. But if you taste a good Burgundy, like a really good Burgundy, it's good from basically the day it's made until the day it dies 50 years later. Like it's going to be, if it's good, it's damn good, and it's always good. So yeah, so I think that's what, hopefully that kind of semi answers your question around. Yeah.
The American market, trying to be
That's a good comment. There's we can't go without mentioning the kind of the Parker points and the the chase for the American market. How much do you think that played a role, Ali?
In Barolo and in Piemonte, I think probably less so than other places. I don't think Piemonte wasn't one of Parker's first loves. He was far more into the Rhône and Bordeaux. Yes, I think there's an element of it, but I think for me the key actually was just to make it a more of a commercially viable wine. As we said before, if these are wines that are so tannic in their youth that they can't be drunk and enjoyed, it's not great, is it? So I think it's certainly a push to be more commercial. Probably not chasing Parker points as much as other places, but just to have a wine that can be drunk at 3-4 years old and that doesn't need to be left for 20-25 years. I mean, as I said, some of them were being aged for 17-18 years in oak casks before they could be drinkable, and that in this day and age it's not possible. So I think maybe an element of some people were Parker point chasing, but more really just to make a wine that that was more approachable in its youth.
Just the reality of it. Just saying, like, if you had to age something for 17 years in your cellar, you're not making any money on that until you sell it. So, like, that's a long investment. Well, that's the gentleman's has just made the comment. They went to Burgundy and Burgundy potentially, but I think Bordeaux definitely. They went to Bordeaux and saw winemakers driving Ferraris, and I think that kind of changed their opinion pretty quick. So we had a question here. Very, very, very important. And that's a perfect segue into our next wine as well. So you guys are fantastic. You're well trained. It's great. So the gentleman was saying the importance, not necessarily just in Barolo, but in Barbaresco of Gaia, and how kind of the throwing the system, just like they did with Sassicaia, kind of throwing the system, being upset with the system the way it was, and deciding to go IGT and foregoing the rules, paving their own path, which brought the quality of everything up with it. So any words on Gaia that you would have, mate?
Well, I mean, Gaia, it was Giovanni Gaia was in the 1960s was the man that put Barbaresco on the map. Absolutely. And of course, it's his son, Angelo, and latterly his daughter, the beautifully named, and she's a beautiful woman, but Gaia. Gaia. And they've done incredible work. And yes, maybe it's controversial at times, introducing other great varieties. And he, of course, makes wine in Tuscany as well, and does incredibly well. But no, maybe he upsets a few people at the beginning, but anyone that's tried his wines will agree that they are incredibly stunning. No, but he was absolutely fundamental in driving change, and change needed to happen, as you say. These I think there's very few great Barolos sort of pre-1970 actually. So anyone that can talk about the modernists and say that they did a bad thing, I think would be wrong. They did a great thing, and Angelo probably more than his father Giovanni was key in driving that. So sometimes you need to change these rules and fight against these rules. And
last year, Angelo was actually he was voted winemaker's winemaker so all winemaking MWs, they put in a vote of who they say is the best winemaker in the world. It's basically like, if you get this, it's kind of just like, well, the most influential people in the world have said that you are better. It's just unbelievable. I know, well, Danny is questioning you, so I think we should kick him out. So,
I'm a winemaker, so I wasn't allowed to vote. So you've got to be an MW and a winemaker.
So that's it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty incredible. And Ali and I actually went to the sorry. Yeah, I genuinely don't. Well, no, that's a very good question. How many winemaker MWs are there, Ali? I think there's more than you think.
There's quite a few. There's a few in Australia. There's
there's a lot here.
I mean, I know of. Oh, I'd be plucky. I mean, there's 400 masters of wine in the world, and I think I reckon there's at least 50 between at least 50 that will be winemakers.
Yeah. There's more than you think. I think a lot of them. Yeah, not all of them are kind of wine writers. Yeah, there's quite a few. I know there's I think there's at least 8 winemaking MWs here in Australia. So there's a few. There's quite a few. Yeah, because I mean we make so much wine. Sorry. Yeah. No, it's every winemaking MW that you can't vote for yourself. No, you cannot vote for yourself.
No.
Pay your mates to vote for you. Yeah. So, but we mentioned. So we'll just go on to our final wine for tonight, which is a little bit of a fun way to end this evening. And I also wanted to take mercy on your taste buds and give you something that would kind of cleanse the mouth a bit of those tannins. So we were talking about blends before. So this wine here from Unicosello is it's from the Clare Valley, an Italian winemaking couple that are live in Australia, naturalized Australians. But they make Nebbiolo, Barbera, and Dolcetto in the Clare Valley. Again, relatively high elevation, high diurnal variation, and they actually blend all 3 grape varieties together to make this wine. So it's a super interesting wine. Again, a lot more on the fruity side, a lot more vibrant. It's youthful, young, meant to be drunk early, not meant to be put down for 2 decades. So just something a little bit fun to kind of finish the night and kind of cleanse the palate, so to speak. So, Ali, I'm not going to get you to talk too much on these guys because I'm not sure you know very much about them. I don't think they make it very far.
No, I'm looking forward to. I love the name though. I love the truffle hound. That's very
cool. Yeah. So,
I've got a question actually for everyone. How's the 13 Barolo Serrano looking next to the 15? Because you've got the same wine. Yeah, but from a different vintage, and another great vintage, 2013.
So yeah, a good question. The 13 versus the 15, because we've chosen to do the same wine just from 2 different vintages side by side here, or 2 different brackets here. But hopefully you guys can kind of see the difference between the 2. The 13 to me, which is what I have in my glass right now, it's just coming together a little bit better. It's kind of looking a little bit more complete, a little bit more. The tannins are nowhere near as aggressive and chewy, or maybe it's just that I'm just now used to and immune to tannin after the exposure we've just had. But
I imagine because 2013 was a really good vintage, not quite as powerful as 15. So 15, I would expect a little bit more tannin from that 15, but 13, as well as I said, there's been a really good run of vintages. 13 was probably the best vintage they had after 8, I think, when 8 then 13. So that's a really good vintage. It should be drinking a little bit earlier. So that it probably a little bit more developed. Is that right?
Yeah. Any thoughts, anyone?
Any thoughts, anyone, on the 13 versus the 15?
Need to try them again. Need to try them all again.
Good idea.
Yeah. So, do we have any questions for our MW this early morning for him? Any pressing questions we want to know about Nebbiolo or anything else? Here's one. It's a very good question. So, Ali, your top food pairing. I'm guessing food, not clothes or anything. Your top food pairing with Nebbiolo.
Oh wow, the truffle business here sort of gives it away. I mean, I think an aged Barolo with anything to do with truffle is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I think it goes really well with you've got that acidity, you've got the tannin, so it goes well with protein. I love it with duck personally. I love it with anything truffly, anything ducky. What did we have? We had some amazing.
I mean, we had a lot of cured meats. It goes really well with cured meats.
It can go well with cured meats.
Like cured duck, especially. I remember we had that cured duck that was just.
That was very, very good. That was very good indeed.
Sorry? Ossobuco. Yep, perfect. Yeah.
Ossobuco, yeah.
Slow cooked. Oh, yeah, ossobuco. That's a very, very good point. I mean, it is the tannins in this wine for me. The tannins just cry out for protein. It just. I mean, this is a vegetarian's nightmare. It definitely is. It needs meat to kind of. That's where those the tannins really come into. They really kind of get soaked up by the meat. So the protein kind of soaks it up, and they match each other really nicely. Yeah, but yeah, like cured meats, hard cheeses as well. Like some really strong hard cheeses go really well with these. You don't like soft cheese, and this will just get totally lost. So yeah. Question? Another question?
Nebbiolo from
This is a so Valtellina Nebbiolo di Lombardy. So that's any what's your experience with that style, mate? Because here from a personal perspective, I have very little access to that. I don't really know.
Valtellina, yeah, I think there's again, to be honest, it's not an area of expertise of mine. I haven't been up there, but making some really good, slightly more accessible styles in the kind of Langhi Neb style. But Valtellina, they can be really, really beautiful wines. Not the easiest to come by, but that could be something that we look at investigating, because you can get it's good value for money there. Whereas obviously in Piemonte, in Piemonte proper, they've gone, prices are crazy, but up there's some very good value wines.
Yeah. So and all terraced vineyards, and well, it's very, so Lombardy is very alpine. You call it alpine. It's very it's on the side of the mountain. And Valtellina, so yeah, it's a different style. So I would call it, so I have tried it. It'd be more Pinot, so it's higher acid, less tannin, because it just doesn't have the same amount of sunshine access to it. And that alpine, it would just be so high acid. But again, kind of, fresher, more kind of drinking young. I've actually seen it, people put it in the fridge and you have it as like a kind of, like a chilled red.
They're quite, as you said, they're sort of more accessible in their youth. They're more exuberant. They're probably a little bit purer, and they mature earlier. Would be generalizations, but we have really good value for money. In fact, actually, that could be something that we could look for, Mark. I think you
want to pop over to Valtellina for us, mate?
Yeah, why not?
He's the only one who can travel now, so.
I don't even know if I can travel. You heard they put France into complete lockdown as of tomorrow or something like that now. So, good job I went to France when I did.
Francesco, you want a job for us, mate? This is Francesco. No, this is. Yeah. So we've got a local here, Ali, with Francesco. So.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Yeah, maybe we can go together, Francesco.
I
would love to.
Yeah, good. All right. So I think that pretty much wraps us up here, unless we have any other questions for our esteemed host this evening.
Do you have any favorites?
Yeah, I mean.
Okay, so we'll start with the shredded berry. That's wine number one.
Is there a wheel?
Ali's he's asked if we can spin a wheel and win a prize.
Yeah, not this evening. I'm sorry. Mark, I think Peter had a question. I wasn't sure if you did or you didn't, Peter.
Just two very quick ones. I would love to cook a coq au vin with this Ascheri Barolo.
Ooh.
And I think even Paul Bocuse would say it's okay to cook a coq au vin with this Barolo. It's beautiful.
Sure, mate. I'll be at your place. No worries. Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good.
The other thing was, look, forgive me, my memory is so shocking, but the third week of the Italian online, there was that wonderful French-Canadian woman who was in Italy.
Paula from Chianti.
That's right. And a lot of what you were talking about, the traditionalists versus the new wave and that sort of thing, reminded me of the way that she shook up the local region there. And so it sounded like your friend there at Ascheri, he's not that sort of dyed-in-the-wool traditionalist. He's willing to do things to make wines more approachable or commercial, but it seems to be something that may be happening in common throughout other parts of Italy.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Pete. And I think I think in these countries, and I would say I put France and Italy in the same bracket here, and probably France even more in these where bureaucracy and, dare I say, sort of pretty draconian bureaucracy regarding the rules of these things does need to be challenged sometimes. And you know, the sort of the traditional way of doing things is not always the best way of doing things. So I think that is happening all in different regions, and I think Paula was doing a great job there as well, you know, shaking things up. And actually, the other things that we've seen in Barolo as well, just thinking now that we didn't talk about this, was, you know, traditionally people would say that to be a great Barolo, and this was a traditionalist way of thinking, Barolo has to be a blend of the whole of the different communes. So they would have a bit from here, a bit from there, because the average hectare holding was only 1 hectare. So, you know, to just produce this single vineyard thing was not the way Barolo was made. And now we've seen this far more Burgundian influence come in, where they're making crus and they're doing different vineyards. And there's still a lot of the traditionalists. We import the wines of Adero. We didn't have the wines tonight, but you know, he was a proper traditionalist. And it wasn't until I think the late 80s where they decided to start blending, to stop blending and start making particular crus and single vineyard parcels. So I think, you know, and I think actually it's great that you can have those two things, to have a full expression of Barolo, but also have these site-specific things. So I think these, you know, you do need things to be shaken up sometimes, and it's happened in Barolo, and you're right, it is happening elsewhere in Italy, and I applaud these things. I think that, you know, there's nothing wrong with trying the new things and pushing the boundaries, and it needs to happen sometimes.
Yeah, evolution, and I think especially with what Pete was talking about before is another.
Looks like we've lost Mark. Mark, we've lost you, unfortunately.
We've lost you, Mark.
Oh, right at the end.
I don't know. They can probably hear us though.
They're having too much fun.
Oh, lost him. He unplugged himself.
I could do our seamless plug for the next coming tastings whilst Mark is looking to fix up the microphone. I don't know if we've got the tasting room as well with us, or if it's just us three on the call. But I'll crack on. Yeah, you can hear me. Brilliant. I can see a few familiar faces there. Are you there? Have we got you? No.
No. That was
okay.
No, that was Anthony.
Oh, hello, Anthony.
There they are.
We've got you.
Got us?
How's that?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Yep. There we go. Sorry, it turned off on me.
You turned
Technology,
yourself
eh?
off.
So Yeah, but I was just saying, basically, there's a lot that younger winemakers are thinking of that I think the older guys aren't, especially in regards to what we touched on before about.
Lost you again, Mark.
I think the batteries have died.
Batteries have died, or keep
Mark, if you take it out, you can use the microphone in that we normally use, I think. Whilst you're doing that, I'll give the rundown of what we've got going forward. As you can see on the screen, Bruce Tyrrell on the 12th of November with the VAT1 vertical. Ali, do you want to just give us a quick description of the Jewels of Rhône?
I can, yeah, as I mentioned earlier on. So I was lucky enough to do my first bit of travel relatively recently. I went to the Rhône Valley to taste the 2019 vintage for Jancis Robinson, who I write for. So I went and tasted upwards of 800 wines. Started in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, did Vaccarat, Chigondas. Had some amazing visits. Went up to the north and then did everything Côte Rôtie. We did.
I think we've lost everyone.
Haven't we?
Keep on going, Ali. I'm actually super interested.
Yeah.
Listen, we're selling to Pete anyway. Pete's attending.
Anyway, oh, they're back. Oh, they're back. I don't know if you heard
And
me.
here
So
they are.
did you guys hear all of that or not? Did you? You did. Okay, cool.
Okay.
So then we went up to the north and we did, I was traveling with Matt Walls, who's a Rhône specialist who works for Decanter. So I was covering it for Jancis, he was for Decanter. And you might have seen some of my videos that I did for United. So we went up to Hermitage, tasted the wines up there. I was in the cellar with Jean-Louis Chave. I was with Thierry Allemond in Cornas. I was with Jamais. I was in the vineyards of Rayas. I was very, very, very lucky to be in some pretty spectacular places, tasting the.
Did you steal the grape from Rayas?
I did. I might have stolen some grapes from the vineyards of Rhône. That was about 50 quid's worth of grape that I had. So 2019 was an amazing vintage. You know, it's great to taste those wines. But what we're doing here is we're tasting some phenomenal wines. We've got some Gigal. We've got some Hermitage. We've got some Côte Rôtie. We've got some white Hermitage as well, and it's going to be a very, very top end. I'm hoping to get some special guests from the wineries, the winemakers, to join me. I'm still waiting to hear from them, but it's a very top end tasting of. Obviously, the 2019s aren't done, but this is some of the older vintages going back to 2013 of Jean-Louis Chave, etc., which really are mind-boggling wines. And I'll be talking a little bit about what's happening in the region as well, and developments and. So it'll be a bit of a deep dive into the Rhône. And to say, thank God I did go then, because France is shutting down in a complete lockdown for a month as of tomorrow.
Can you hear us now, mate?
I can hear you, yeah.
We've got you.
Switched systems, we're back. So yeah, no, we're very glad you got over there, because now it looks like everything's shutting down again.
Yeah, no, I was lucky. I was very lucky. It was a great thing. And the rest of my day will be spent writing up my tasting notes of Jean-Louis Chave and all those wonderful wines that I was lucky enough to do. So remind me of that. Transport me back to France.
Tough life. It's a tough life. So yeah, let's go for wine of the night. We're just going to pick one of the night here.
In order. So, okay, we're going to start with the Stradivari. Anyone for the Stradivari? All right.
Getting warmer.
The Ascari, the Nebbiolo. Number 2. We got expensive taste in the room. We'll go the Primo Estate Nebbiolo, our Australian edition.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting warmer. Yeah.
All right, we got a couple there. All right, here we go. What's the roller first? All right, now the 25th. Yes, that's just for tonight for you guys. So 15% off tonight off those. The 2015 Barolo, first one.
Yep.
The Barbaresco.
Yep, a couple of takers from Barbaresco.
Okay. And then we've got the 2013 Barolo.
Impressed. Yeah.
All right. So do we?
Any takers on
So it looks like we've got kind of even splits. We've got the Jasper Hill Barolo 2015 in Barbaresco.
Yes.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Good lineup. Let us pick one.
Yeah,
One five of them.
one coach only.
They're cracking wines. So you've had some pretty. That's a great end to a Thursday, I think, for you guys over there. Now it's almost getting to wine. Well, no, it's not even 9 o'clock in the morning yet. So nearly.
Just past coffee o'clock, so. All right, cool, mate. Thank you very much for joining us. We're very sad we can't actually have you here, so we can go and grab a beer after this. But very glad to have you digitally, if not personally. So thank you, mate.
No, thanks. It's been great. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Pete, and thanks, Mark, thanks, Luke, and very gutted I can't be there with you all, but at least we can do this kind of thing, and hopefully I'll see some of you at the Rhône tasting. If not, I'll be present for the Chile and Argentina. Some of you may know that's probably my area of expertise. I lived over there for many years, and I studied in my previous life South American studies, and married a Chilean lady, and my children were all in Argentina. So it's a very dear place to me. So I look forward to that tasting as well. But great to be joining at 7:30 in the morning talking about wine.
Well, we're sorry you're not here, Alistair, but forgive the pun, but we're with you in spirit.
That's very nice, Pete. Well, cheers, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your night. Enjoy drinking the rest of the wines, and see you all very soon.
Good to see you, buddy. Thank you.
Yes, guys. Take care.